Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Justin Bayarjon, and I am Dr. VR. I invite you to register for my podcast to stay updated with new episodes when they are published. Simply click the register button on Dr. VR's channel, as well as the bell icon next to it to be notified. In this episode, produced in collaboration with XRMust, I'm thrilled to host Bob Cooney, a visionary in the world of immersive entertainment. Bob is a world-renowned top 10, 10-time entrepreneur who has built a career accurately predicting the intersection of bleeding edge technology and business trends for more than 35 years. So he's widely regarded as one of the leading voices in virtual reality and the metaverse. And Bob has been the go-to market strategist behind the launch of some of the world's most successful virtual reality entertainment products. He's also an accomplished global keynote speaker and expert moderator, leading insightful and engaging discussions at major industry events worldwide. Bob is also the author of Real Money from Virtual Reality and co-author of Guardians of the Metaverse, offering deep insights into the business of XR and emerging technologies. Bob, welcome to Dr. VR.
Hello, doctor. That's a mouthful. I'm going to have to trim that bio a little bit, I think. I fell asleep halfway through it, so I can't imagine what your listeners are like. They're like...
Well, it's because there are so many great things to say about you.
Yeah, what do you cut out, right?
Exactly. Bob, speaking of which, can you share more about your professional and artistic journey? What initially attracted you to working with VR, and what pivotal moments shaped your career in the industry?
Yeah, wow. Look, 35 plus years, there's a lot there, but the short version is I started one of the first successful laser tag businesses. So I was actually a penny stock broker in Denver, Colorado during the Wolf of Wall Street years. If you've seen that movie, I was one of the guys in the bullpen, not the guy driving the Ferrari doing drugs. And one of my clients had bought stock in a little company that was building a VR business, a VR technology product, and wanted me to check it out. I drove up, did the demo, blew my mind, offered to help them write their business plan, which we did. I wound up acquiring the company because they went off in a different direction, and as we were launching the product at IAPA, which is the big industry trade show in Orlando, my biggest customer called me and said, "Hey, we have a new product we're bringing to market. We'd like to show it at your booth because the show's sold out." And I'm like, they're my biggest customer. What am I going to do? Say no? And it turned out to be a product called Virtuality, which was the very first virtual reality product that really consumers could touch. And it was a VR arcade system. It was way before its time. This was 91, maybe 92.
Wow.
And press outlets from 50 countries showed up. The line was around the convention center to try it. And we wound up building virtual reality and laser tag arcades in malls in the mid-90s with a company called Edison Brothers. And
I remember them.
Yeah. And I sat back and I said, oh man, if somebody could combine laser tag and virtual reality someday, that would be amazing. Because this was a pod, right? You'd stand in the pod and it was clunky and slow, and latency was measured in seconds, not milliseconds. And then fast forward to 2015, I was back at IAPA and I saw a demo from a company called Zero Latency in Melbourne, Australia. And I did it with Brent Bushnell from 2-Bit Circus. And Brent is the son of Nolan Bushnell, who founded Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. He's like a legend. He's like the godfather, the grandfather of video games. And Brent and I have become friends over the years. And we did this demo together, and it just blew my mind. And there was a point which you had to walk over some rocks, over some lava, and my body froze and it wouldn't go, even though I knew I was in a trade show. And I was like, oh, wow, this feels real, which VR had never really felt real up until that point.
Yeah.
And I came out and I Tim Roos, who was the founder, I picked him up in a giant bear hug and scared the shit out of him. What's the rating on this podcast? Am I allowed to say
the rating on this podcast?
Yeah. Is this can I curse? Because that's.
Oh, totally. Go ahead, please. Be yourself.
So I picked him up in a bear hug and I said, dude, you did it. And he looked at me like, who is this crazy American? And I said, you're about to make I made all the mistakes you're about to make in the next 3 years. Let me help you. And I flew to Melbourne a few months later, and we wound up working together for a couple of years, bringing them to market. And And since then, I've just been, really all in on virtual reality and what it can do for people and the experiences that it can create. And then I went on to help other companies kind of launch their products, Virtuix, Omni, and Hologate, and I don't know, can't count how many afterwards. Just kind of really helping them with go to market and launch strategies.
Wow, that's so interesting. So over the years, as I can see, you've worked on several innovative VR attractions. What lessons have you learned from these experiences that continue to influence your approach today?
So there's a lot of amazing creators that create experiences, and they don't understand how to get those experiences designed, wired, and into the market so they can be operated profitably at scale by the people who control the venues. And so,
Hmm.
and the sad part about that is that then nobody gets to see them. They bring them to Venice Immersive or South by Southwest or Sundance or whatever, and some people see it, but then they never go anywhere. And I think that for creativity to change the world, to change people's mindsets, to with VR as transformational technology, it can actually change it can evolve your consciousness level, but people have to do it. And if you don't have a business lens that you can apply to your creation might not matter. And that's sad. And so I think where I've tried to do is help connect creators with operators so they can have more conversations, so there can be more understanding of the needs of each other, so these things can actually get out in the world and help operators make money, which is about selling tickets. Yeah.
Hmm. Speaking of which, you've spoken about the resilience of location-based VR post COVID-19, something that deeply affected the location-based VR market. How has the industry adapted, and what lasting impacts has the pandemic had on location-based VR
Mm.
attractions?
Yeah. Look, I think what COVID did was shook the tree a bit. Um,
Yeah.
there were a lot of companies that what I call folded under the cover of COVID, folded under the cover of COVID. They were
Love it. It's
marginal.
a mouthful, but
Yeah, marginal businesses from an economic and viability, feasibility standpoint, and they're like,
yeah.
oh, I think I'm just gonna shut the door, blame COVID, and move on to the next thing. And entrepreneurs, having been one my whole life, and I started my first business when I was 17. Um, I think we tend to intertwine our identity with our business, and I identify as an entrepreneur. I just did it there, right? And so when we fail, it feels existential, and so we don't want to admit failures. We don't like to admit that we got it wrong, that we're not successful or whatever. And there's a lot of psychology behind that. And so I think
Yeah,
that
it's a learning curve.
um, yeah. And look, so I think that a lot of companies used COVID as cover to shut. The ones that survived were either had a core profitable business or couldn't deal with failure psychologically. And I suggest
Mm.
many of them were in the latter and not the former, because as I talk to operators, especially in the VR arcade business, right? I'm talking about location-based virtual reality primarily. That's my space.
Yes.
Um, those people bought themselves low-paying jobs when they opened arcades. Like the economic underpinnings of the business. When you look at the two things I tell people to look at is revenue per square foot and labor percent. Right, those are your two KPIs to run a profitable location, a VR arcade. And those metrics just haven't been there. It's changing now. There's some developments now happening that market is shifting dramatically, and some new operating models have emerged where you're seeing some real exciting stuff, which we'll get to. But I think the lesson there it's the same thing I said the first time, is that you got to figure out how to build a sustainable, scalable business that generates enough profit to allow you to reinvest in the business and grow, and not just hold on or survive. Because look, there's an opportunity cost for every entrepreneur, right? If I take my time and energy and life force and I put it into a venture, there's got to be a return on that investment. It's not just money, it's all the other things that you put into building a business that actually make it successful. And
True.
there's an opportunity cost. If I'm going to put it into something that's marginal, I could be putting it into something that could scale and give me a better return on time and effort. And that's the thing that I think is missing in a lot of the virtual reality stuff. And we're seeing that all shake out still, even post COVID.
Of course, we'll talk about it a little bit more down the interview. But now, when I'm looking at VR ownership, headset ownership, still relatively low at the moment. How can location-based VR centers capitalize on the novelty of immersive experiences to draw in new audiences while ensuring long-term engagement?
Yeah, look, I one of the things in my bio that I'm going to have to check is accurately predicting the intersection of virtual reality and entertainment or whatever it was. And I think many of us fell prey to the adoption curve of we're 5 years away, we're 5 years away, we're 5 years away. And now those of us
Yes.
that have been in it, we're all like, well, maybe we're 10 years away. We're extending that time horizon a little bit. And so I think that what I've learned recently, intuited, is that VR is going to be a generational technology. And
Mhm.
so what I mean by that is, and this gets to adoption, right? So I don't know, 2017, I led a workshop at the Euro Film Mart in Berlin, the and around VR adoption and distribution. And one of the things that came out of that is the insight was that distribution is going to be fragmented. It's always going to be fragmented. And you're going to have a bunch of little micro vertical markets where it gets adopted, which is exactly what's happened, right? It's in enterprise
Mhm.
training, it's in aged care, it's in healthcare, it's in this, it's in that. But the consumer adoption has really lagged behind. And what we thought would happen is because of all the adults being exposed to VR technology in the workplace and in education, that then it would pull up the consumer adoption. That hasn't happened at all.
At
Um,
all. I agree.
and so, but what is happening, and this has only become apparent in the last year, 6 months, maybe even 3 months, if you're not following Gorilla Tag and now the follow on product called Animal Company, those two products are free to play games for Generation Alpha. Generation Alpha is predominantly 12, 13, and under. That's
Yeah.
the new third place or Fortnite for kids, young kids. And this Christmas, 12, 10, and 12-year-olds were begging their parents for Quest headsets so they could play Gorilla Tag. And
Really?
so, yeah. And they're in it every day. And so the stickiness and adoption curve of Generation Alpha of adopting virtual worlds as the new playground. And so Gorilla Tag and Animal Company are the new playgrounds for kids. And as they age, they're going to take that technology with them, and then it's going to become the standard way spatial computing will then get adopted. But the companies that are trying to force it upon the millennial and older audiences are struggling because it's just such a paradigm shift in the way we think about reality. It's just too
Mhm.
dramatic a shift. Smartphone adoption happened in the workplace. It started with the
Yes.
BlackBerry. We got
Mhm.
email away from the office. Then all of a sudden we're like, well, if we can get email away from the office, why can't we get the web away from the office? And the minute the iPhone came out with Pinch and Zoom, we went, that's it. And every business person wanted an iPhone so we could have the web away from the office. And then it just built from there with the app economy. But that was an adult driven thing. And then we gave our phones to our kids to entertain them so we didn't have to do it. Right. And so now the other day, I saw a 3-year-old walking on the beach staring at a phone. And I was just like, society's fucked, whatever, different conversation. Um,
I
but it was adults driving it down to the kids, and it looks right now like VR is going to be kids dragging it along, and whether they give it to their parents and their parents actually get using it or not, the jury's still out. But I don't think location based VR. To get to your question, sorry, long way to Tipperary.
No.
I don't think location based VR is driving adoption at all. And that was the original intention for HTC in 2016. Rickard Streiber was the president of HTC Vive, and he created the Vive Arcade platform to give arcade owners the ability to license software legally to run arcades, thinking that VR arcades would drive adoption of headsets. It just hasn't happened. The Apple Vision Pro demos haven't worked. Like there just is no dragging adults into this market, it seems. And I have suspicions, I know why, but I think it's deep-seated beliefs in what is real and what isn't. And I don't want to be confronted by the fact that the reality that I'm used to might not be the only reality. I think there's some deep-seated psychology there.
That I actually agree with you, because I'm still debating if whether or not I should land my headset to my kids, because they're deep into Fortnite right now, Roblox, and then I feel like if I was to give them a headset, it would create some sort of addiction, because they're very prone to addiction. So, but I really want them to delve into, the immersive technology kind of thing. I'm just waiting, but I agree. I think it could be generational, passed on to the next generation so they can adopt it literally. I agree with you.
Which means it could be another 10 or 15 years before
Yeah.
VR becomes mainstream technology. Now, the difference, there's some things happening there around, smart glasses with AI and wearables, and we'll see what the new Snap Spectacles do. But, if augmented reality technology, we can solve the physics of waveguides and make them more user-friendly, I'll just leave it at that for now, then that might wade people into the waters of VR a bit more. But I think there are real physics issues to solve there around power and weight and
yeah, I agree. I don't know. I always felt like the future of VR is AR in a way. Not in terms of like the technology itself, but more like the portability of things.
Yeah, look, and this is something that, as long as I've been in this market and how much I've done more VR experiences maybe than anybody on the planet. And I did an AR experience that was trying to use HoloLens to create an easier onboarding experience than a headset. So it was using AR as an immersive technology, and it became apparent to me that, first of all, the way they were using AR wasn't immersive at all, because it just created a window which still had a proscenium between me and the scene. And so that's not immersive. Yes. If there's a proscenium, it's not immersive. Flat, full stop. You can use whatever terminology you want. And so, correct, I don't know that AR is immersive technology unless it's applied to, now this was in an empty room. Now if you apply it to the real world and you're layering things on top of the real world in context and space, that's more immersive. But
that's how I see it.
Yeah. And so, so we have to see how that all plays out. Yeah.
For sure. Now, various formats such as mid-scale and large-scale VR attractions are emerging now. And as you see, you believe that location-based VR is not necessarily going to help the adoption of VR, but how do you see these formats shaping the future of location-based VR? And do you believe this diversification is a positive direction for the industry?
Look, I think what's happened, two things there. One is what's happening is people are experimenting with different formats, which we need to do, right? Yeah. If you look at the early days of cinema, right? Like there was a lot of experimentation with formats until we landed on some standards, around, screen ratios and with, and the rule of thirds. Like these are really basic things that we take for granted now, but they came through experimentation of early creators. And we're still in that phase now with size of the space or the arena that you put VR in. Is it seated? Is it motion? Is it free roam? What's the density you can have of number of users in a space, which gets to revenue per square foot, which is one of those big metrics, those KPIs you have to land. How do you do storytelling in VR? Right now, it's been mostly gaming, and the gaming audience is a narrow. I know everybody identify like, what is it, like 80% of people identify as gamers, but a lot of that is people playing Candy Crush or Wordle. Like Wordle is a game, and so if you play Wordle, you're a gamer. And I'm like, those are the statistics that are put out there by the IGSA, which is the Game Association. But reality, people who play Wordle aren't going to be putting on a VR headset and doing zombie battles in an arcade.
Correct.
And so the audience slice of gamers who are doing VR gaming is really narrow. And so I think getting into storytelling is where we're starting to see, I'm seeing the exciting growth happen. And so, and that's opening up the audience to broader demographics and more people. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. But
Yes.
we have to really figure out what are the standards that we're going to start adopting as an industry that allow content creators to create content that fit the needs of locations. And right now there's no connect. And so I have a website called the VR Collective, which I've built to try to
Mm.
show operators what's available in the VR supply side, right? Supply chain. And there's like 50 different companies making, launchers with games attached to them. And within those games, there's about 25 different arena shapes and sizes that are supported. And so you have,
Wow.
which is obscene, right? Because if you have one company that made a game that only fits a 10 by 12, but the industry standard in meters, but the industry standard is 10 by 10 meters, they've built a game that can't fit in 70% of the locations just because they didn't
Yep.
know. And so I think those are some of the things we have to get to, are these standards to allow creators to coalesce, to build stuff to where operators can have more selection of content and get that flywheel going. So more content, more locations, more content. I feel like we're just beginning that stage now.
I agree. Personally, I've done a lot of VR. I wrote an entire PhD dissertation on this, and my favorite location-based VR experience I've ever did was The Void. I'm a huge fan of The Void. Fortunately, it disappeared. And The Void's complex technology required significant staffing and operational overhead, as you know. So, what lessons do you think can be drawn from its approach, and how can future location-based VR ventures balance cutting-edge innovation with financial sustainability?
Yeah, look, I wrote an article, "The 7 Reasons the Void Failed." Everybody thought, and
That's
that
why
was one of,
I'm bringing it up.
yeah. And look, and that was one of the ones that disappeared under the cover of COVID. It was just never a viable business. And it's unfortunate because it was so cutting edge, and did
Yes.
create an amazing experience. Look, I think that at the time, the easiest way I could suggest the problem the Void had was they were trying to build colonies on Mars before we'd put a person in space. And so it wasn't a moon shot, it was a Mars colony shot. It was just too much too soon, and it was more than consumers needed. Like, I watched people go into zero latency at the time, and zero latency and the Void were really the two players in that market early on.
Mhm.
And you'd see people do zero latency, which was a much simpler experience to build, and they were blown away just as much as somebody in the Void. Like, the Void was it was just, and
Interesting.
so what they did is they built this tech stack that was like, for example, foot tracking. There was no reason to have
Yep.
foot tracking in any of the Void experiences, but you had to put on these things on your end, and added operational friction. Um, and so, look, I think that it's understanding where the customer is in their journey of understanding VR. It's still really early in the adoption phase of consumers. Just doing this with their hands, like, if you've seen enough people do VR now with inside out tracking, and they do, and hand tracking, and they spend the first 5 minutes,
First thing they do.
they
Yep.
just do this, and they're like, wow, that's really cool. So, understand what's enough for today's
Mm.
consumer, and build to that spec, and then leave yourself room to grow in complexity going forward. Like, that's the overwhelming lesson of the Void. The second one that I think a lot of people get wrong is the Void, and this gets to one of the key challenges of the industry. The Void did a deal with Westfield Properties, and they were a strategic investor that led them into and Disney, that led them into going to really high traffic, high rent spaces. But they didn't do enough. They didn't generate enough traffic to get anchor tenant mall rates. So they were paying
Mm.
high percentages and high rents. But the statistics showed, and these are the Void's own statistics, that 70% of the people that went to do the Void had never been to the mall before. This came out of Westfield, London. And so they were drawing
Oh.
people just to go to the Void, but they were paying for the traffic that they weren't able to convert. And so they still had to do marketing spend, and they were paying high rent for traffic that they weren't converting. And so that was one of the fundamental flaws of the business model. And so,
Interesting.
and it was it was too short an experience to really be a destination attraction. It was a 20 minute
Mhm.
experience. And so I like to say nobody puts on pants for a 20-minute experience. And so, though you might take your pants off for a 20-minute experience anyway. But, so the experiences need to be longer, or they need to be part of a multi-attraction venue where people can go for an hour, 2 hours to go and do something. And so there were some real fundamental flaws to their business thinking that led to their struggle with success.
Yeah, but then again, they literally kicked off my shoes the first time I tried it, and I went back and I did everything. It was marvelous.
It was an amazing experience. And James Jensen, who's the technical founder of The Void, is doing a new experience called Jump by Limitless Flight, which is absolutely the most mind-blowing thing I've ever done in VR, which is wingsuit flying in VR. And it's a true simulator. You put on a real wingsuit, you put on a helmet with a VR headset in it, and then you have to literally jump into a wind tunnel where you look like you think you're jumping out of an airplane, and then you parachute down to a cliff, and then you have to jump off the cliff and fly the wingsuit in a wind tunnel, but you don't see the wind tunnel, you just feel the wind. And it catches you, and you're in a harness, so it's helping you, but you're actually flying a wingsuit in virtual reality. And he's used photogrammetry and helicopters to capture the jump points and then render them in Unreal 5. So they're looking more and more photorealistic. And it's the most mind-blowing transformational experience I can imagine you doing in VR. And and I'm really excited to see where they go with that.
I want to do this. I live in Toronto, but I don't know where it's going to be.
In Utah.
Launched.
It's in outside of Salt Lake.
Yes.
Yeah, but they are going to be opening some new locations this year, I hope. So.
Yeah, because that's where the Void started in Utah. Yeah. Now you mentioned IPs. Licensing blockbuster IPs like Star Wars, Ghostbusters has been both an opportunity and a challenge for VR attractions. I'm also thinking of like Squid Game for Sandbox VR. How do you access the role of brand partnerships in immersive entertainment, and what strategies should operators consider when working with well-known IPs? And is it even a good idea to do that?
Yeah, boy, that's a loaded one.
Yeah. I know.
Look, so the answer is it a good idea? It depends. I think you have to use it strategically, like anything. I'm a strategist, so I see everything as a strategy problem. One of the big challenges in VR, we talked about short experiences and putting on pants and getting people to come out. So IP helps bridge that gap, right? If I'm a Squid Games fan and Squid Games, virtual is coming out, I'm going to be more likely to go experience Squid Games and try it. And then I get into it. And I was like, oh, what else do you have? Oh, you got a zombie shooter. Let's go play the zombie shooter next time. And so there's absolutely a marketing benefit to using the right IP to connect to the right audience. Now, that's really important. Okay. What's the right IP for the right audience? If you don't know your audience, you can't answer that question. And I see a lot of people in the development side and the creative side want to build the experience that they want to play, not necessarily the experience that's going to resonate with the audience. That can be a challenge because IP can be expensive and it can be really limiting from a creative standpoint. It's not only expensive to license, but then the depending on the IP and the control that the licensor wants to have on it, it will likely increase your production cost because there's going to be reviews and checks and revisions, and we don't want this, we want that, and they're going to constrain what you can do and say based on canon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, using it strategically is important. That being said, this last year, I've had more studios approach me saying, how do we get our IP into location-based VR than ever? And so the studios are interested. And I do believe that with the streaming business and the amount of content that's been put out into the world on streaming platforms, that there's a bit of an arbitrage. It almost should be a buyer's market for IP. And I think a lot of people look at movie IP, but a movie, there's a promotion window, it runs, it goes to streaming, and then it's gone. But Squid Games, it was out for a season, then they did a reality show, now they're doing season 2, and you're seeing these streaming IPs that have what we call legs in the industry. They're going to be around for a long time. Banijay Entertainment just announced Black Mirror VR as a location-based experience that's being built by one of my clients, Universe, in Barcelona. And this is season 6 of Black Mirror, which portends that there will be more. And so I think streaming is really where people should be looking for IPs, and I do believe there's a lot to choose from there, but you got to use it strategically and you got to know your audience.
For sure. You mentioned Barcelona. How is the location-based entertainment industry evolving across different territories or countries globally? Are there regional trends that stand out in terms of adoption, innovation, or consumer behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure about consumer behavior. I think that's too big a question for me to tackle.
Okay.
But certainly around on the creator side and the business side, the cultures and governments that support creativity with grants and funds, you're seeing more happen in storytelling, because there hasn't been a clear path to profit in that space yet, and so it required, foundational and government support. And so Canada's got a great fund. Australia has a great funds. Europe have great funds. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of the stuff in the storytelling market happen outside of America. In America, it's all gaming. And so because it's been easier to see how you sell tickets, because people love to play games. And so the arcade market has been much bigger in America, though it's big in other places. And it started in Asia with, VR, in China with VR cafes, they call them, which were the next version of internet cafes, for different cultural reasons. You are seeing a lot of storytelling stuff happen in China as well. The government is really supporting a change to VR, and it's part of their plan. Their governmental plan is adopting more immersive and VR technology. So yeah, you're definitely seeing different hotspots doing different things, but the storytelling stuff is really taking off in Europe and Canada and China, and I'm trying to bring that into America now to show people what's possible, because this is the biggest entertainment market in the world. We have more locations than everywhere. It's, everybody speaks the same language. It's the same currency. There's an economy of scale that you get when you bring products successfully into the US as a supplier that is hard to get in either China because of the currency and money situation and the political situation, or in Europe with, different languages and different cultural beliefs and norms and standards. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Now, Sandbox VR recently secured new funding and plans, a rapid expansion. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities that come with scaling a location-based VR business at this level by using the Sandbox example?
Yeah, look, I think Sandbox is an interesting company. I've tried to get, behind the curtain to try to really understand the single unit economic model, because without a single unit economic model, there's no business, right? And so they started, I think I did their first location in Hong Kong in 2017, believe it or not. And so, and then they opened one in San Francisco, and then they raised a ridiculously large round that I don't think was really what it was portrayed to be, from Andreessen, of like $100 and something million. I suspect it was tranche related and venture debt. And then the pandemic hit and they went into bankruptcy and reorganized and came out. And by the way, no shame there. I did bankruptcy twice, Chapter 11 reorgs with Laser Storm. So there's no judgment or shame there. Use the rules to do whatever you have to do. They came out strong. They did another smaller round. Then they started to open a shit ton of company stores. They opened like 30 company stores in America with just a couple of franchises: Vancouver, New Jersey, London, and then
one here in Toronto.
Yeah, and Toronto, yeah. And then it's a franchise, but it wasn't an early franchise. It's fairly new, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then about a year or so ago, or 2 years ago, they really shifted to franchising hard internationally, outside of America first, and now in America. And clearly that's a way to grow, and it's a less capital intensive way to grow. And look, I've spoken to, Jeremy, who's the franchisee in New Jersey, and when he just opened his second location, and he was planning on opening a third. And I know that the guys in London opened 2, and they just opened a third, but as part of Gravity Wadsworth, which is a giant family entertainment center in London. So it's kind of part of a multi-attraction facility. Germany is exploding. The franchisee in Germany is opening
Mhm.
multiple sites. Like it feels like every 2 weeks they're opening a new site. And so, look, there's two schools of thought there. One is for people to be expanding that rapidly, it's got to be working at a single unit
Yeah, for
economic
sure.
model.
Mhm.
Or there's just a shit ton of dumb money out there who believes that if you open enough of them at some point, you get a customer acquisition, cost scale that hits a tipping point where your customer acquisition cost drops to the point where you can be profitable. And I don't know which one's which, to be honest with you. I can't tell because they don't share with me the financials that would allow me to look at single unit economics and determine, is it profitable? Is it not? If I had to place a stack of chips, I'd say, yes, it is. But look, they're over 50 locations. They're on their way to 100 or 200, they claim. And with that scale of locations and standards gets you content and brings your content cost down per title because you can defray the content development cost over more units.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden you get that content flywheel going, so you can bring more content more frequently, which gets people to come back more often or attract different subsets of audience based on IP. And so I think that there's a bit of a scale. It's a network effect like Uber. If you don't have drivers, you don't get passengers. If you don't have passengers, you don't have drivers. And location-based VR is in that point right now where you got to build more locations, which is why we need standards.
For sure.
Sandbox has created their own standard around a stage and a tech stack. Zero Latency's created a standard. They have 100 locations now with a stage and a tech stack. And I think what we need now is more industry standards for indie content providers to be able to get their content into locations, because that's how we really scale. And I think that's the next big area of focus that the industry needs to take.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about the fact that Sandbox doesn't necessarily require major infrastructure changes. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Look, it depends on what you call infrastructure. They have
Yeah,
to build, rooms that, for each one of those, which are walls. Walls is infrastructure.
yeah,
They use optical tracking systems from Vicon, which are very expensive.
sure. Yeah,
And so there's a lot of infrastructure there, and then you got to wear the wearable infrastructure. All of that to me is infrastructure, and so
sure. Of
and
course.
so I think
Yeah,
that
yeah.
and it doesn't give you flexibility. So Steven Zhao just posted on LinkedIn this week that they're looking to move into and develop content that's more cultural and art, because they're seeing the explosion of that happening in Europe and China. And my first
Mhm.
question is, will that work within their infrastructure limitations? They've created some standards where it's a 6-player stage
Hmm.
that's only
Yes.
300 or 400 square feet. And these bigger plays from companies like Excurio and Universe and Felix and Paul are, multiple thousands of square feet, up to 10,000. Felix and Paul's building a 20,000 square foot one in Vegas.
Wow.
And so, will it translate to that? And so they've built infrastructure, they've built a standard that could pigeonhole them away in a way, or
Mhm.
that constraint could drive new innovation, right? And they can find a way to work within those constraints. But there's a lot more infrastructure at Sandbox than I think we need in the industry, especially with inside out tracking now. And I'm a big
Yeah.
proponent of this thing I call the virtual theme park, which really, came from my conversation, or downloadable theme park, from Brent Bushnell, which is, why can't you have just a giant space and reconfigure it in software and let people
Exactly.
do whatever they want, wherever they want, based on day parts or crowds or whatever's happening with the audience. And I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, so the ability to update VR attractions without major infrastructure changes, I believe, is a key advantage of location-based VR for the number of reasons you just mentioned. So
Yeah.
now, yeah, so what strategies would you recommend for operators to keep experiences fresh while managing costs?
Yeah. Right now, like, there's two ways you can go. One is you go to a turnkey solution and now you're locked into their content pipeline. So,
Hmm.
Sandbox, Zero Latency are the two big ones in the gaming space. I'm sure both of those companies are going to move into non-gaming content. They have to. The gaming market is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Getting school groups in and seniors in and stuff like that in other day parts is critical. So you need different content. So that's going to happen in the next year or two. Um, but going with a turnkey solution, you're locked into one content provider for now. Um, the other option is to do what I call a DIY platform, and you assemble the solutions yourself, and then you adopt a platform that, or a number of platforms that are compatible with each other, with the basic infrastructure. Like, we know there's two headsets that you use. You either use HTC Vive Focus or you use the Pico 4. Those are the two headsets, and most software providers and platform providers are adopting both of those platforms, right? But it's a bit of a Wild West landscape, and there's a lot of different solutions that you have to go out there and test and try, and then you have to cobble them together into something that really works for you. And then you have to look at what audience you want to attract, what content is out there that they would want to do, and then what platforms are in the middle that connect those two. And so there's no easy answer to that. You gotta either do a shit ton of research, or you gotta come to the VR Arcade Summit in March, or use the VR Collective as a website as a resource, but or hire somebody that can help you navigate that. And that's not a pitch for me. I don't do a lot of work with operators unless you really want to scale your business. So yeah, it's a tough one right now. It's a tough question to answer.
You mentioned the VR Arcade Summit. Can you tell us about the upcoming VR Arcade Game Summit in Las Vegas, and what key discussions or trends do you anticipate being at the forefront of this year's event?
Yeah, look, all of these things. I think the big one is this concept of alternative content, trying to move beyond gaming and shooters. I think that's been something the audience, the operator's been looking for. And on one hand, that's what people want to buy. That's what they want to do. And so they want to buy tickets. And so there's a bit of how do we break that momentum? And I think the storytelling stuff that's happened in cultural and immersive spaces, is the biggest signal that there's a broader audience willing to spend just as much, if not more money for those experiences. And so, we're going to be talking a lot about that. We're going to be talking about education. We're starting to see companies build education experiences for the location-based VR market. There's a company called VR Core that I'm excited about that's working with NASA, building an ISS, International Space Station experience using free roam VR technology that they're bringing out to schools. And I think that if we have this infrastructure that's hit some kind of a standard in entertainment centers, then schools don't have to buy the infrastructure or rent the infrastructure. They can just bring the kids out to experience this on virtual field trips. And I think that's a market opportunity that we're going to be talking about. And so we're going to be talking about social experiences. One of the knocks on VR has been its isolating technology. And I wrote a lot about that in 2016. And now we're starting to see with things like Gorilla Tag and Animal Company and virtual co-location experiences that it can be actually used as social technology, but we're not seeing enough of that. And so there are some people who are using mixed reality and virtual reality to build social experiences. So how do you use VR for social in the LBE? And then we're going to be talking about, augmented reality. Snap is going to be coming, and Enclu with Versimmersive, and talking about where are we with AR tech and how are people using it today to build experiences, and where might it be going in the next few years. And so those are some of the new things we're going to be talking about.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to attend. That sounds so exciting.
Airfares to Vegas are cheap.
Excuse me?
Airfares are Vegas to cheap. Come on out and do some podcasts.
I would love that. So with rapid technological progress, what emerging innovation, do you believe will most significantly impact the location-based VR sector in the coming years? You just teased me with a couple of them talking about your game summit, but could you please just expand on this?
Yeah, look, one of the big one is markerless motion capture. Vicon, other companies are working on that. I've done some behind the scenes Vicon demos and they blew my mind. Doing it without latency is a challenge. And with co-located multiplayer VR, the latency can literally create safety issues. And so a lot of the systems you see out there on the web still have too much latency. I've watched demos of them, and you move and then you move, and you see your character move. And I watch people trying to play games in it, and they've built the lag into the game loop almost. They have to predict where their character is going to be going in advance, and that doesn't work for co-located experiences. But I'm watching that technology really closely because it removes the infrastructure, some of the infrastructure cost, and certainly the operational friction about putting wearable devices to track your body. I think AI, massive impact on everything, but it's certainly location-based virtual reality, in the
Sure.
ability to do predictive motion for being able to do body tracking without external cameras and wearables. It's called, what's it called, doctor? That thing where you have to predict where your body is moving in advance. There's a term for that, and I'm getting old, so my memory's lagging.
Oh, wow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, it'll dawn on me in a minute as soon as I stop thinking about it. But the challenge of building avatars that don't do wonky things when it loses tracking, and you see your avatar and your
Oh,
arms bending
yes.
that way. Inverse kinematics. So inverse kinematics
Oh,
create a
okay.
lot of overhead in the development cycle and pipeline for content developers. Full body tracking and eliminates the need to do that because you get a full skeletal frame in real time, and you just map your avatar to the skeleton. And so markerless motion capture is going to remove the ability to create the requirement to create inverse kinematics, which is going to drop cost and make better
Funny you're
experiences.
mentioning this. Sorry, funny you're mentioning this because I was just playing a game and the avatar's body was just moving all over the place
It
and
breaks immersion. It's terrible.
it breaks immersion. Yeah.
It's terrible. And so you see developers do things like, don't show your legs because you're not really looking at your feet, unless of course you're in an experience where you have to dance or you have to place your feet in certain spaces, like the Squid Games game where you're doing the glass bridge, or Anvil has a game where you have to kick down a door. Well, you need foot tracking for that. And so if you're building that into an experience, you have to have either good inverse kinematics or you have to have full body tracking. And markerless
Mm.
mocap's going to eliminate that in the next year or two. I think that mixed reality is a big one for onboarding experiences. So you can put the headset on, you can see now in full color stereo, even though there's a little bit of lag. You can actually put it on right now and you can move into the experience and create better onboarding experiences. I think as mixed reality gets higher resolution and lower latency, you'll see virtual VR laser tag happen where you just go into an empty room and you have virtual barriers. There's a game from Resolution Games called Spatial Ops where they're doing that now. You can download it on the
Yes, I
Quest
love
store,
it.
and it's just not. I don't know that it's quite ready for LBE, but they're working on it. But I
I
think mixed
agree.
reality is a big trend that we'll see, and then AI in character animation and world creation is going to drop the cost of content creation, which hopefully will increase the variety of content, which will mean more content means more locations. But then you have the race to
Yes.
zero on the content side, where you get all of these people creating content. You have too much content for the number of locations and the number of players, and then nobody's making money. And then you have the haves and the have-nots. So you have a couple of companies making money, just like in a lot of things, and you have everybody else fighting for table scraps. And we see it in everything from professional surfing to VR arcade gaming, where there's a couple of companies that generate almost all the profit, and then there's a whole bunch of companies that are fighting for table scraps. And so getting
Yeah.
your, if you're on the content side, getting your go-to-market strategy right is critical, because there's only going to be a handful of companies that actually wind up making money in any given market.
Another topic you brought up in your ebook, Building Sustainable Location Based VR Attractions, it highlights the importance of optimizing the entire chain from installation to operation and repair, something that I believe we don't bring up often enough in these discussions. What best practices should entrepreneurs follow to ensure seamless integration and long term success?
Yeah, look, it's a real challenge. The ecosystem is really, really fragmented. And so the core
Yeah.
fundamental challenge is every one of those things that you mentioned and more take money, time, and resources for somebody to provide.
Mhm.
And in order for them to be profitable, somebody's going to be willing to pay for them at a high enough price to support margin to be a business. And so the companies that have done a good job of it have collapsed the ecosystem into a full stack offering, zero latency, sandbox, even the void, even though it wasn't profitable, because they
Might
knew
come
they
back
had to.
though.
Huh? They might. Yeah, I've been hearing that for
Mm,
years. We'll see. And they're going to do
I
training.
know.
They're going to do military, like whatever. I love you, Curtis, but let me know what you're going to do, and then we'll start talking about it. Um, the challenge there is that all of that stuff is generally loss leading stuff to get a solution to market. And in an
Yeah.
open ecosystem where I think everybody would love, a lot of people would love to see this go, there's not enough companies providing those services, and operators aren't necessarily willing to pay for them. Like I can't tell you how many
Yeah.
operators I've talked to are like, help me do this. And I'm like, pay me. And they're like, oh, I don't have any money. And I'm like, well, then you're on your own. And so there's a real kind of desire. And look, I think that stems from the fact that people go, they see a Quest is $300, they put it on their face, and they have a mind-blowing experience. And like, wow, I could start a business for a couple of $1,000s doing this. And that's just not real. And so we get a lot of
Yeah.
people who are undercapitalized, who are have a vision, but they don't understand the business enough to be able to either do it themselves properly, and or they don't have the capital to pay somebody for the service they need to do it. And I think that's holding the industry back. And I don't have a solution to that, to be honest with you. I haven't seen it yet. It's my advice to companies that are trying to bring products to market is if you need to get scale and velocity, you have to collapse the ecosystem and bring the whole thing to market yourself. You got to do installation, training, support, marketing,
Yes.
development. You got to bring the whole stack yourself, because otherwise you're spending all of your time trying to rally members of an ecosystem who don't actually care about your business. They're just trying to run their own profitable business. And ecosystem management is generally in a small emerging market not an effective way to build a go-to-market strategy. And so it's the big challenge.
I agree. I agree. Again, from your perspective, how has location-based VR evolved since its inception, and what key trends do you foresee shaping its future? I know it's a very big question, but I feel like you're the person I should ask this for.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing is going from room scale to free roam. I mean, that's the big one. I just,
Yes,
I just
sure.
interviewed, Synthesis and Springboard merged a couple of weeks ago, or Synthesis acquired Springboard VR, who are the two big kind of content distribution, marketing, operational platforms for VR arcades, and and they're seeing this trend shifting from room scale VR to free roam VR. And I think
Hmm.
that's the trend. And they're like, oh, because people have VR at home, but most people don't have VR at home. That's not actually the driver. I think that it's
Nope.
just a better experience. It's but it
Hmm.
creates challenges. It requires more, a little bit, could require more space. You need some efficiency there. It could require more
Yes.
labor because people are running around. You got to watch them more. You can't just rent out the computer for an hour and let them do their own thing and select content. And so
Yeah.
I think there's some challenges there, but that's the big trend is going from room scale to multiplayer experiences where people play together and have more of a social experience. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that and a lot of innovation in the operating models of that over the next year or two.
Okay. Okay. Finally, for entrepreneurs looking to enter the market today, what key advice would you offer based on your extensive experience as the world best in the field?
Look, my first advice when somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to open a VR arcade, I say, don't.
Oh, okay.
And that's because I know they have no idea what they're getting into, and they think it's going to be a lot easier and a lot cheaper than it is going to be. And then I quickly follow with, after they swallow that advice, I say, now I know you're not going to be listen to me, so here's some things you can do to make sure that to maximize your odds of success. And I asked them a bunch of questions like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you think you're going to build a big business and you're going to franchise it and open it up? I was like, just throw that away unless you have a lot of money. If you're doing it because you're just passionate about virtual reality and you love putting headsets on people and seeing their reactions, and you've got the ability to live on a meager wage of a manager of a VR arcade, then go for it. Here's some things to do. And I just say, look, optimize for revenue per square foot and low labor. Labor as a percentage of revenue. You got to figure out how to get your labor rates under 20% of revenue, and you got to get your revenue per square foot up over, 200 square foot, $200 per square foot, or $2,000 per square meter, depending on metric or whatever the other one is called, imperial. Um, and and go slow. don't rush into it. Do your research. Like most people see something and they say, oh, I can do this thing without understanding there's 50 other alternatives. But then what happens, they see the 50 alternatives and then they get overwhelmed and they don't know how to make a decision, which is a good thing because it slows them down. And so those are, that's the advice. I'd say look at what's happening in the cultural and art space. Look at what companies like Xcurio and Eclipso are doing, what Felix and Paul is doing, what Universe is doing, what Small is doing. There's some really, really interesting hot trends happening there where these big immersive projection theaters, are now adding VR to them. And now some of them are actually trying to do more VR and less projection because it's more immersive and interactive. And so I would probably and the other thing is go do a bunch of VR. Go spend 3 months traveling around wherever you can get to and do 50 different VR experiences from different companies to see what's possible. So you can build yourself a bit of a experiential database to look at what you might want to do and what makes sense and what doesn't. That's probably the biggest tips I can give people.
Bob, what's your favorite location-based VR experience ever?
Yeah, it's probably Jump by Limitless Flight. Strapping
the one
on
you just mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, strapping on a real wingsuit, putting on a helmet, and then all of a sudden being in an airplane, and then seeing the airplane door open virtually, and then the wind is there from the wind tunnel, and I knew what was going on behind the scenes, so I understood, but feeling that, and then having to jump out of the airplane, trusting that I was going to be okay, is what we would call a transformational experience, and because you have to have the courage to jump, you have to have the faith to jump that you're going to be okay, and you have to suspend that disbelief to a point where you can overcome it, and then you have to do it again, and then that experience of flying. Everybody wants to fly. Like I have dreams occasionally of flying. I think a lot of people do. And, my flying was always low to the ground. I couldn't get up in the sky. I couldn't take off. I don't know what that says. My partner, Kylie, who studied Jungian psychology, has a lot to say about that. But yeah, that one just to me is mind blowing. And the fact that they charge over $100 per experience and they get it and they get people to do it again and again and again, and shows the power of these experiences, and people are willing to pay a lot of money for a great VR experience. And I think as an industry, we underprice virtual reality in general, because one of the core challenges is getting people to try it for the first time. And if the price is too high and they don't understand the benefit of it, they don't know what they're paying for. And so we drop the price thinking it's going to create market elasticity, but it drops our margin too. And so one of the challenges we still haven't solved is how do we get people to try things without giving away the farm from a pricing and margin standpoint? And I don't know the answer to that one yet. We haven't solved that one.
Maybe for our next episode.
Maybe for the next episode.